Okay, so I'm just going to do a quick analysis of Paul Keating's speech, which is I think it's page 11 in your booklets and goes through to page 12. So, funeral service of the unknown Australian soldier. What's important in terms of context of the speaker is that Paul Keating was the Prime Minister of Australia from 1991 to 1996, and he's a member of the Labor Party, so he was the leader of the Labor Party at the time. Also, really importantly, is that this speech was delivered on the 11th of November 1993. So, hopefully, some of you are aware the 11th of November is Remembrance Day. And Remembrance Day comes about because it was when Armistice Day was, which is when World War One ended. Okay, so the first Armistice Day is the 11th of November 1918, when World War One ended. So we're looking at a speech that was made 75 years after the end of World War One on Armistice Day or Remembrance Day. Um, and this speech is essentially a eulogy to an unknown Australian soldier. So this Australian soldier was found on the Western Front, so around France, maybe in the Somme or something like that, during World War One. Okay, and they don't know the identity of this soldier, which is really important in terms of how Keating gets across his political message, I suppose. Um, so yes, it is a eulogy, but it's a eulogy to a public audience. Okay, so it's a eulogy to not just a personal audience for this soldier. It's a eulogy to essentially the whole country or whoever is listening. So I would say there's political motivation in here in terms of forging a new Australian identity. And that links back to Paul Keating and kind of what Paul Keating stands for. And hopefully by the end of this, you'll kind of have a better sense of what I mean by that Australian identity. Okay, so I apologise if I'm looking away. I've just got notes written all over my page here. So I don't want to miss out on anything. So to start with, what you should notice immediately is that there's this anaphora of we do not know. So it's got we do not know this Australian's name. We do not know his rank. We do not know where he was born. We do not know where in Australia. We do not know. Okay, so all these things we do not know. Okay, so this is important because it's about everyone. Okay, so the we do not know. It's important. It creates ethos in the audience. Okay, so ethos is about ethics, remember, or morals, and allows Keating to speak on behalf of all Australians. Okay, so we do not know. So he's not saying I do not know. He's saying we as Australians don't know. Okay. And that's important because he's getting this connection with his audience. The next thing that I want to talk about is this last line here where it says, we will never know who this Australian was. Okay, so this is really important because I suppose you've got high modality here. We will never know. Okay, so there's no sort of grey area in this. It's a definite. And it emphasizes the futility of war. Okay, so it emphasizes what Keating is saying is the futility of war. Okay, so that idea that war doesn't really achieve anything. However, I suppose what did come out of World War One is that Anzac identity, and that's something that's become very much a part of the Australian identity and Australian values. And you would have seen that even on our Anzac Ledge the other day. It's an extremely important event in how Australia sees itself and the shape of the Australian identity. Okay, so then our second stanza starts off with this really important conjunction or interjection of yet. Okay, so yet means like but. Okay, so all these things here, we're saying we don't know anything about this soldier. Okay, however, or yet. He's among those who we've always honoured. Okay, so he's caught up in this idea of what it means to be an Anzac and that Anzac legend. Okay, that has been forged since World War One. That idea of sacrifice and the Australian way of always getting in there, and all those things that you associate with the Anzac legend. The other really important thing that's in this stanza is the continual use of statistics. So you've got 45,000, 416,000, 324,000, 60,000, 100,000 Australians, okay? So you've got all of these numbers here. And this works to just really reinforce the magnitude of war and the sacrifices that have happened as a result of war. Okay, and then you've got this really short stanza here, or paragraph, where it says, "He is all of them and he is one of us." Really, really powerful. So you've got this high modality of is here. He is all of them. So them is referring to the Australian soldiers, and he is one of us. Okay, so this idea of he is one of who Australians are. And this is done to create that sort of sense of pride that Australians feel in being associated with someone who was willing to sacrifice so much, and linking with that Anzac legacy. This Australia, so the 1993 Australia, which is even different to Australia now, I suppose. This Australia and the Australia he knew are like foreign countries. So you've got a simile here where it's showing that this soldier that we don't know about, would not even recognise Australia today. We've changed so much in that time. And I suppose in the time of 1918, we're much more allied to Britain in terms of our values, and then also in terms of like where we position ourselves in the world, where now we kind of don't necessarily value Britain as much as like that mother country that we used to when this soldier was at war. The tide of events since he died have been so dramatic, so vast and all-consuming. So you've got some hyperbole here with so dramatic, so vast and all-consuming, just to show the extent of these changes. And also you've got a bit of a metaphor here, so that tide of events, so that idea of like that, the enormity of events and how much has changed. So has created a world beyond the reach of his imagination. So just going back to that metaphor of Australia being unrecognisable to this unknown soldier. And it's because of, I would say Keating is arguing that it's because of the sacrifices that these Australian soldiers made is that we now are a different country to what we were during World War One. Because we have this new Australian identity as a result of World War One. Okay, so in this next stanza, this is where I think Keating's political agenda starts to become more obvious. Okay, so we've got these unknowns here. He may have done this. He may have done that, and these are things that in World War One, people thought was going to happen. So people joined the war because they thought war was going to be this fantastic journey and would just be this amazing experience. And we'll talk more about that when we do Wilfred Owen, because that's not unique to Australia, this idea that going to war would be this wonderful journey as opposed to the reality of war. And then really importantly, here he says, but the chances are he went for no other reason than that he believed it was his duty, the duty he owed to his country and his king. Okay, so this idea of being loyal to your country, so to Australia, and also to Britain, okay, and to England, which is what I was saying back here, like this idea that in World War One, we were much more allied with Britain and like had this like mother country relationship with Britain. But I would say here where Keating is talking about and his king, he's being quite critical and suggesting that there should not have been any duty to England, which then leads on to what I want to talk about later about the idea of being a republic and what I think Keating's political motivations are in this speech. So then in the next stanza, because the Great War was a mad, brutal, awful struggle distinguished more often than not by military and political incompetence. So you've got some accumulation here of mad, brutal, awful struggle. And that is just to show the ridiculousness of war. More often than not by military and political incompetence. And here he's referencing like the old country, so referencing the people who just so like the British soldiers and also the Australian people in charge, who let the soldiers go to war and knew that it would be futile, but still let them, had this massive waste of human life. so here it says, like I said, victory was scarcely discernible from defeat. So you've got quite emotional and pointed language here, and almost accusatory language in terms of pointing it at the people who made the decisions about war and let these innocent people go to war. And because it was a war to end all wars, so that's what they thought World War One was going to be. They called World War One the Great War because they thought once this war is done, nothing can be as bad as this. And obviously, we know that World War One sparked events that led to World War Two, which is an even more devastating war. So here, where it says "sow the seed," you've got that metaphor of like the idea that World War One essentially was the growing place for an even more disastrous war. So we might think this unknown soldier died in vain. Okay, so in this, Keating's saying like all of this badness, like why would we think that there was anything good about war? However, in the next line he goes on and says, but. Okay, so again you've got this conjunction or interjection. Okay, so he's saying this soldier hasn't died in vain because it is in this soldier's death essentially that this new Australian identity has been forged. Okay, so but in honouring our war dead, as we always have and we do today, we declare that this is not true. Okay, so this soldier didn't die in vain. For out of war came a lesson that transcended the horror and tragedy of this inexcusable folly. Is a lesson about ordinary people, and the lesson was that they were not ordinary. Okay, so in that phrase about ordinary people and that they were not ordinary, you've got parallelism here. And so he's forging this idea that the ordinary person essentially became a legend. Okay, and then he goes on to talk about the heroes of war, and he's saying it's not the generals or the politicians, it's the average people. So the average, in his case, the average Australian. So it's not the high class people who made the decisions, it's the people who were on the ground fighting. Okay. They taught us to endure hardship, show courage, be bold and well of resistance, believe ourselves, to stick together. So these things here are he's like doing accumulation or a listing. So accumulation would be the technique you could talk about of the things that we consider to be uniquely part of the Australian identity that have been cemented as part of the Anzac legend and Anzac legacy. So all of these things here. So from this point, you really start to see Keating's egalitarian voice. So egalitarian means like equality for all, so that no one person is better than the other. And in fact, ordinary people, I would say he raises them to a higher stature than the people on the upper classes who would normally be considered to be the better people. Okay, and he's quite critical of like the upper class. So you see here these very emotive and negative words of prove that real nobility and grandeur belongs not to empires and nations. So empires is about the British Empire. So he's having a bit of a stab at the of Britain here, but to the people. So the idea of the ordinary person. Okay, so this is surely at the heart of the Anzac story, the Australian legend which emerged from the war. Okay, so he's saying that the Anzac legend is not about all the military victories. It's about free and independent spirits who had mateship. It's a democratic tradition, so it's not a monarchy, it's democratic, the tradition in which Australians have gone to war ever since. So he's talking about these characteristics of Australia and this egalitarian Australia that Keating believes in. Okay, so in these last little bits here, Keating is just really reinforcing that idea of the egalitarian Australia and quite pointedly sort of saying that we've moved away from Britain and we need to really sort of break that tie. Okay, so we've got here where he's again sort of listing these things about this egalitarian nature of Australia, so that all people are equal, so no one is better than anyone else in this this stanza. Here we've got his tomb is a reminder of what we have lost in war and what we have gained. Okay, so this is a metaphor. So the loss is the loss of lives that we've had as a result of war, but what we have gained is that sense of Australian identity. And what it means to be quintessentially Australian. Okay, and this video is about to run out of my time limit, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about these ones in part 2 of this video, which should only go for about 2 minutes, so make sure you watch that one at the end. Ta.